Visit NelsonFinancialPlanning.com.
Do you remember that old television series, Where Are They Now? There was different variations of that I recall growing up. I think there was one on VH1, so that's a little bit of a throwback network, that aired for a number of seasons back in kind of the early 2000s. The concept, of course, was that you would take a past celebrity and sort of update the audience on sort of where things are. Where are they now, if you will? Of course, that was back when everybody still had cable TV and hadn't all switched over to YouTube TV. As looking at the subscription numbers, it certainly seems that there was a big transition over to that platform, particularly with that whole dispute involving ESPN and Charter Communications. If you have YouTube TV, one of the neat things about it, particularly during football season, is the split screen thing, right? So the split screen thing that does 4 games all at once. My son loves that. I frankly find it confusing, but anyway, that's a digression. Where are they now, though, is sort of the theme for this week's episode, because we're going to do a little bit of a dollars and cents version of Where Are They Now? Past celebrity topics, if you will, of things that we have talked about earlier this year, and sort of update you or give you the latest thinking, bring you up to speed on what is going on. So our 3 topics for today, and in sort of our Where Are They Now version of dollars and cents, is a little bit of a follow-up from an episode that we did back on May the 21st. And we were joined in that episode by Ron Cervantes, who is president of IT Solutions, and his company helps small businesses manage their IT and, most importantly, protect them from frauds and scams and things like that. The other episode, and this one goes all the way back to March 26th, was a conversation that we had about cash and cash being quote unquote king, based upon the amount of dollars that had been flowing to it, based upon the recognition of, wait a minute, the Federal Reserve has raised rates, and so consequently that means that it ultimately should be reflecting in my savings and money market accounts and things like that. And then lastly, we're going to give a little bit of a Where Are They Now on the employee retention credit. Now, you may remember this one from our May 28th episode, but that episode focused on the dirty dozen tax scams that the IRS puts out every year. They put out a list of things that taxpayers really should be watching out for. The employee retention credit made that list, and so we thought it would be good, though, to do a little bit of an update on that. So that's the program for today. Welcome into Dollars and Cents. This, of course, is Joel Garris. I'm a certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning, where we've got a great team of folks who also happen to be certified financial fiduciaries. And they, of course, as they always do, stand ready this week to help you change your life with a successful and cost-effective financial plan. So welcome on into Dollars and Cents. So the identity theft, it's hard to miss this one, right? I mean, this continues to be an issue. We're going to talk about some of the ways in which you might be able to prevent it, sort of update you on some of those tasks, if you will, and what to do sort of when it happens. Because the reality is it's not really a question of being able to avoid it. It's going to happen to you at some point. What should you do when it happens to you? What are the options? Here's the fascinating statistic, sort of the update part of this particular Where Are They Now, if you will. According to a recent study, Gen Z, so Gen Z, born between 1996 and 2014, sort of that the digital natives, right? Those were the kids that were the first generation and probably as a result of this, scarred for life. But the first generation that had an iPhone or an iPad or a cell phone or whatever readily available through their entire life. Here's the fascinating statistic. So that age group, Gen Z, despite being digital natives, is 3 times more likely than boomers to get caught up in a fraud scam or an email scam or those kinds of things. Isn't that fascinating? If you would think that folks that were familiar with it, right, grew up around it, had it ubiquitous in their lives since day one, would in fact be a little bit more cleverer when it came to avoiding that. But that actually is not the case. 3 times more likely to fall victim to fraud and internet scams than even the baby boom generation. So anyway, we're going to talk about how to prevent it and what you can do, not if, but when it happens to you, because let's face it, it pretty much happens to everybody. We got a couple of stories we'll share as well of folks bringing things into the office over the past few weeks, asking us that very question. The second one, cash is king. If I thought it was king back in March, it's like super king. It's reached super king status now. $5.6 trillion in money markets, a record high in deposits. And certainly a lot of folks excited about, man, I'm finally getting a little bit of interest on my savings, which is great. But that's really only for a season, especially when you consider what the road ahead may very well look like. Because what's different than where we are now versus March, back in March, the Federal Reserve still was on a warpath of raising interest rates. As they raised interest rates, then money market rates and things like that moved up in lockstep. So you were continually getting more and more interest on your dollars. But if, based upon what the Fed has said of late, based upon the meeting that they just had in the past week or so, that they're probably done, maybe one more, that they're getting to the end, okay? They're close to the end than the beginning, that's for sure. And so what does that mean for those cash savings rates? Because things are once again about to change again. And certainly don't want to be caught flat-footed, sitting in cash thinking, oh, life is wonderful, I'm making 5%. There's some interesting data based upon looking at the 4 prior cycles of where the Fed has raised rates and then leveled off and then ultimately wound up reducing rates that we wanted to share with you on the program as a follow-up from that March 26 episode. And then lastly, boy, I'll tell you, the employee retention tax credit. This thing made the list of dirty dozen tax scams, but for some reason, people seem to not really care. A lot of it is because there has been such a push, particularly with small business owners, that the emails that I get, the phone calls that we get to the office, it's incredible. The advertising that is being done by firms that have created sort of this cottage industry of going after this employee retention credit. Folks, this one is just unbelievable. The IRS basically just put a halt to processing any more refunds on this one. They were getting 50,000 a week, most of which were not accurate and not companies that did not qualify for the employee retention credit. We'll talk about all of that when we return here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Plan. Fraud and identity theft is just so all around us. I mean, you just can't miss it. You cannot avoid it. It's almost like it's just second nature these days. The amount of calls or questions that we get on this from worried clients is just, it happens nearly every day. And just these past couple of weeks, we had a couple of different folks bring in letters from the breach involving a software that manages a lot of pensions in America. So we had a couple of different people bring in sort of the exact same letter saying, well, we think there's been a breach. And as is the case with those letters, as you know, you probably have got one at some point. Oh, you can get a free credit monitoring service for 12 months or 24 months or whatever the case may be. That is sort of across the board in terms of those letters and those types of breaches that occur. And then the response is always the letter, and then the letter then says, well, you can get free credit monitoring, things like that. Another client shared a story with me how this summer that they wound up having a copy of their passport stolen when traveling. You know, a lot of folks that travel advise that you should keep a copy of your passport separate from your passport, because if your passport ever gets stolen, then at least you've got a copy that you can reference your passport numbers and things like that. So a great bit of travel advice. But unfortunately, in this person's particular case, the copy of their passport had actually gotten stolen, and then of course, you know, sort of the countless email scams and problems over the years. And what's fascinating is you would say, well, that probably just impacts the people that aren't terribly familiar or comfortable with all of this technology, right? Maybe you get an email, you're not really thinking or don't really have your guard up, and so you open up the email, and then that's where the trouble begins. Or maybe you go to a website and put in your information, and then ultimately that's maybe not a real legitimate website or something like that. So, and you would think that, you know, maybe those folks that are less technical might or not as familiar with all this technology stuff would be the ones that would fall victim to it much more often than, say, the younger generation. But the fascinating thing is that Gen Z, which is generally thought of as people born between 1996 and 2014, so I have three, now young adults that are in that age range, Gen Zers, if you will, digital natives, folks that grew up with this technology being ubiquitous, all around us since day one. What's interesting is that they are 3 times, that age group, digital natives, 3 times more likely than boomers to get caught in online scams. So maybe, you know, the whole sorry boomer type of commentary that gets made really doesn't apply, because they're the ones that aren't getting caught in these scams nearly as much as those digital natives. 2 times more likely Gen Zers are to get their social media hacked. And in 2017, that age group lost about 8.2 million to all of these scams. But listen to the number based upon last year. It's 210 million. So a massive explosion. That generation is clearly now getting targeted for what should be a high level of digital savviness that maybe is not. So we thought we would spend some time on the program sort of recapping some of the fundamentals of what we talked about back on our program on May 21st. In that radio show, we were joined by Ron Cervantes, who is president and owner of C Solutions, which is a IT provider for small businesses. He actually is our provider at Nelson Financial Planning. And always available and ready at any point in time to assist on anything and everything. But there's certainly some things that you can do that will help protect you. And then, more importantly, if you do become victim, then what should you do? So welcome on into the program. This, of course, is Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. One of Central Florida's longest-running radio programs, coming to you on a host of radio stations and podcast platforms. Feel free to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform, or even our Nelson Financial Planning YouTube channel. If you have any trouble locating us, go to our website. You'll see a bunch of icons and links and things like that. Click on whatever looks most familiar to you, and you will get immediately connected. Once there, make sure you subscribe so you don't have to go through that process again. My name, of course, Joel Garris. I'm a certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning. So I think this has even happened to my kids. I think my youngest got caught in this. Connor got caught in this where he went to a website, thought it was legitimate, put in the credit card information, and lo and behold, that actually wasn't legitimate in any way, shape, or form. And I guess when we think about how much Gen Z is finding themselves a victim, 3 times more than boomers, twice as likely to get their social media accounts hacked. Maybe it's familiarity, right? I mean, familiarity breeds contempt, right? So maybe because you're familiar with it, you're maybe not doing all of the steps you should be when it comes to changing your passwords on a regular basis. All those things that we talked about in that May 21 episode, we were joined by Ron Cervantes of C Solutions. Changing your password on a regular basis, making it difficult, not just, a simple 1, 2, 3, 4 password. The days of that should be long gone from your repertoire. So you've got to be updating those passwords. You've got to be changing them on a regular basis and using something that is unique. And the reality is that may not be convenient, but as our fellow IT support individual, Ron Cervantes, says, well, you can have it easy to work with, or you can have it safe to work with. And those are, in fact, mutually exclusive terms when it comes to IT and technology. So, and I think the other thing, and this is certainly lacking, and this could describe a lot of the issues for Gen Z as well, is that there's not really a lot of education on this. There's not a way to become more educated on these best practices. As a business, there is, and I know this because we do this at Nelson Financial Planning, where we're part of, it's an ongoing education, because oftentimes the biggest issue is just mistakes that people make along the way when it comes to clicking on an email that they shouldn't have, or those kinds of things. And certainly as a financial firm, that is something that we spend an awful lot of money on, technologically wise, to make sure that our client information is as safe as it possibly can. And so one of the things that we also do is this notion of educating about the proper cybersecurity. So every month, every employee at our firm is required to go through these little training videos that just sort of keeps it top of mind. What we also do, or at least what our IT provider, C Solutions, does, is it actually sends out sort of test emails that are set up as fake scam type emails to really test that folks are staying alert to it. And then if you click on one of those that's like a fake scam email and you get tripped up on it, then you have to go in for additional testing and education. And so I think a lot of this can certainly be resolved by education as well. So make sure you're staying educated and up to date. Again, that's why we're kind of doing this segment as a Where Are They Now sort of recap of that show from back in May, because getting scam right costs real money, and irrespective of age and generation. Be careful, be smart. For additional tips, I think we did the entire show on May the 21st on this topic. We encourage you to do that. And take a moment and get educated. Doesn't matter how old you are. Look, Gen Z, you're getting just as scammed, just as much, in fact, 3 times more than boomers. So take the time and really try and figure it out. If it happens, you have some options. And it involves credit monitoring, it involves fraud alerts, and credit freeze. When we come back, we're going to talk about those options as we continue Dollars and Cents here on News Radio WFLA Orlando. So unfortunately, when fraud or identity theft happens, what are some of the things that you can do in response to it? Before the break, we were talking a little bit about some of the ways in which you might be able to prevent it, right? Change your password regularly. Stay up to date on the latest scams. Get educated on the kinds of things that are happening out there. We had a number of great suggestions on our May 21 program. We encourage you to go into our archives on your favorite podcast platform or even our YouTube channel at Nelson Financial Planning, and just take a look or listen into that episode on some of the best practices, if you will, in terms of trying to avoid becoming a victim to identity theft or fraud. The reality is, though, it's all around, and it's only a matter of time before, as we were talking about in the last segment, you get one of those letters that says that there's been a breach at some company that you do business with, or there has been an issue involving maybe your doctor's office or medical provider where there was some sort of a breach in terms of software. So when you get one of those letters, I think the immediate reaction is, okay, well, what should I do? And typically those letters will offer you like a credit monitoring service for the next 12 months or 24 months. Certainly that was true of the letters that folks brought in over the past couple of weeks involving a data breach for a particular software that is used to sort of manage pension plans. And so that's certainly one option. The reality is that just tells you that it has happened, right? I mean, that's the problem with any kind of monitoring service that says, oh, well, okay, guess what? This happened, and, here it is. The reality is that there's other options that you have that we would encourage you to look into as well. One of which is a fraud alert. You can put a fraud alert on your credit report by calling any one of the 3 credit agencies. So that's Experian, that's TransUnion, and Equifax. And call any one of the 3. One call to one of them does it for all 3 of them in terms of placing a fraud alert. And then you could also do a credit freeze. Now, freeze is a little bit more, I guess, draconian than an alert. What the alert does is if someone is opening up credit in your name, it produces a requirement to call you and just verify that, yes, it is you that is applying for that credit. A freeze basically does exactly what it suggests, which is that it makes it very difficult to wind up getting credit once you place a credit freeze. So the credit freeze is sort of more, I would say, more a situation where you lost money directly. The alert would be a situation where you're concerned that something may happen or something has happened, but it got caught and there wasn't any loss of money. Personally, I have had a fraud alert on my account, my credit report for several years now, because a few years back there was someone going around town trying to open up bank accounts in my name, and so put a fraud alert, and lo and behold, all of that stuff stopped, because every time someone would try and do something, then there would be a phone call to me, and I would say, no, I'm not able to do that. Interestingly, and this is just an aside, a lot of that activity actually happens when you're out of town. So when that data that is obtained in terms of your travel plans, or you're clearing through security at the airport or something like that, then that data becomes prime territory for trying to do things, because they know that you're away, and so consequently, hey, well, now's a good time to try and create some fraudulent activity. So anyway, those are the things to know as sort of that follow up from that May 21st episode, sort of a where are we here on Dollars and Cents, where of course we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. My name is Joel Garris. I am a certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning, where we encourage you to check out our website at nelsonfinancialplanning.com. And once you're there, feel free to leave comments. Do you have questions on anything that we talked about on the program? Or maybe you've got a topic that you would like to hear us discuss on a future program. That's a great way to let us know that. Speaking of things that we've certainly talked about before, continuing the theme of the show of a sort of where are they now, we're going to talk about the employee retention credit, which we talked a bit about on May the 28th when we were going over the list of the IRS's annual Dirty Dozen tax scams. So what is the employee retention credit? Well, the employee retention credit is a COVID-era tax credit that was provided to small businesses that allowed for a pretty significant tax credit for them for keeping their employees on the payroll during the height of COVID, when everything was sort of shut down. That's what it is. The reality is that it has exploded into this cottage industry because there's been some pretty aggressive marketing by companies like Innovation Refunds, Bottom Line Concepts, Synergy Partners, where they are actively encouraging people to work for them on a commission basis to find small business owners who are willing to amend their tax return to claim this credit. Folks, this one has really caught the IRS's attention, so much in fact that they have shut down processing any of the requests for the employee retention credit as of just these past few days. Why? Because it just was simply getting out of control because of the cottage industry that had been created, and these massive referral fees that these companies were generating for people who were finding small businesses, and particularly small business owners that were willing to amend their 2020 or 2021 tax returns and apply for this employee retention credit. That it was a massive influx of returns, 3.6 million claims for this employee retention credit. 15% of those were filed in just the past 90 days. The IRS was averaging, in fact, 50,000 claims per week. The projected cost of this employee retention credit when it was first passed was going to be about $150 billion. It's estimated that at this point it's already costing taxpayers $230 billion. The cost this fiscal year for this employee retention tax credit is going to be more than the mortgage interest deduction and the charitable contribution deduction combined. So there has been a lot of money going out the doors for amendments involving a tax credit going back to 2020, 2021 that ultimately a lot of people out there are unfortunately getting scammed into believing that somehow they qualify for this. And here's the kicker. Here's the real test of whether it might be fishy or not. When the tax preparation firm that is preparing your amendment, that is telling you, oh, you've got to do this because you're going to get back tens of thousands of dollars, is doing it based upon taking a percentage of that refund as their compensation, that right there is one of the biggest red flags you can have when it comes to tax preparation. Don't go with someone who's charging a percentage of your refund, because that just gives them an incentive to get you the most amount of refund, whatever the case may be. There are very specific requirements where you have to prove that your business was impacted by COVID. And in those cases, that's how you qualify. Many of these recent amendments trying to qualify for this employee retention credit are fraudulent. You don't want to file a fraudulent return with the IRS. That's a really, really, really bad idea. I don't care if some company said, oh, we can get you this big credit. Oh, we can get you all this money back. You're still signing your return. It's still on you. The IRS is not going to bite that, oh, well, this company over here, they said that I could get this credit. So I went with it. They said that's not how it goes. Combined with the fact that a lot of these companies are probably not going to be around in a year or two. Okay, so by the time the IRS catches up with you and you say, well, that company that did it, where'd they go? No. They took the fee and they're gone. This employee retention credit, we have not heard the last of it. The IRS, just as these past few days, suspended all of these requests for refunds because it was just getting completely out of control with the amount of fraud that existed in these amended tax returns, small businesses trying to claim this employee retention credit. I certainly hope we don't have any people out there that have done that, because I wish you well. With that, we'll take a break here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. Doing a little Where Are They Now with some past episodes of topics that we have talked about. Maybe celebrity topics might be a little bit of a stretch, but if you remember the old Where Are They Now show, it was recapping past celebrities and sort of updating you as to what they were doing now. And that's what we're doing on the show this week. We've already talked about in the last segment, that employee retention tax credit that we talked about extensively back on our May the 28th show. Folks, this one, you got to be real careful of it. We've had a number of small business owners talk to us in the office about this one, and we could not have been any clearer. If your business was not impacted by COVID, if you saw your bottom line continue to increase, you really don't want to go down the path of the employee retention credit, because the point of the credit is that your business was impacted. It's going to be hard to argue to the old IRS that your business was impacted if, in fact, your revenue for that year was more than what it was the prior year. Be very careful. There's some aggressive marketing happening out there that is encouraging people to file these returns. I can tell you right now, when the rubber hits the road, it is you, the owner of that small business, the taxpayer, that is responsible for the return that was filed, not the company that encouraged you to file it. And the reality is that by the time the IRS catches up with you, I'll bet you $1 that that company ain't going to be around anymore. So watch out for that one. The update on it, 50,000 claims a week pouring into the IRS. And the IRS knows it's scams for the most part, and that's why it's on its dirty dozen tax list of scams. And so they said, we're done. We're not processing any more of these returns. Similarly, we were talking a little bit about the identity theft conversation. Our episode on May the 21st, we were joined by Ron Cervantes of C Solutions, an IT provider for small businesses, and we talked a lot about things that you need to do. It's important to be educated. It's important to change those passwords. And even if you are a digital native like those Gen Zers, shoot, you're 3 times more likely than the boomers to get caught up in a scam, or twice as likely to get one of your social media accounts hacked. So be careful. Make sure you're following all those rules. If it does happen to you, or when it happens to you, a fraud alert is a good option to look into, that you can place that by calling any one of the 3 credit bureaus and say, hey, I want a fraud alert because I believe something has happened to me on a fraudulent basis. This last segment is then a Where Are They Now that relates to the show that we did back on March the 26th. We were talking about cash being king, and certainly interest rates on money market accounts and the like were starting to get people's attention back in March. Well, my goodness, if you think they got people's attention back in March, they really have gotten people's attention now. A record amount of CD money market money, $5.6 trillion that is sitting in there, because people have become very enamored with, finally, after 15 odd years, I'm making a little bit of interest on my savings. And I guess that underscores the risk or the problem with the approach, right? I mean, don't we all know that over time, money market rates, cash rates, I mean, historically, they haven't been a very strong provider of investment returns. One of the weakest provider, if you will, typically losing to inflation and the steady climb of inflation. And so when we think about overall asset allocation, and we think about how weak the historical returns have been on cash, let's not forget that, right? Historical returns on cash, 2-3%. When you think about historical returns on a balanced portfolio, that's 8-9%. I mean, so 2-3%. I mean, that's like a quarter of what the performance would be over time for a balanced and diversified portfolio. So understand that this cash is great, and I'm making 5%, and that's fantastic. That's not a solution for the long term. That maybe is a solution for the season that is 2023. But the question to really be asking now is, what happens next? Because when we think about where we were in March, the Fed was still on that path to raising interest rates, right? Well, the Fed now clearly has said that they are pausing. They might do one more interest rate, but by their own projection. So here's the important piece of information here. By the Fed's own projection, they expect interest rates to be 1% lower, the full 1% lower, by the end of next year, 2024. So great, your money market's paying 5% now, but by the end of next year, it's going to be 4%, based on what the Federal Reserve itself is projecting. So what does that look like? What does that mean in terms of investment? Well, if you look at the kind of the other prior cycles, the reality is that that concept of don't fighting the Fed works both ways, particularly when the Fed is cutting interest rates. When cash yields, when the Fed starts cutting interest rates, if you look at the 4 prior cycles, okay, 18 months after the Fed stopped, or in essence hit its peak and then paused and didn't raise rates anymore, within that 18 months, your cash yields decline on average by 2.5 points in absolute magnitude. So if you're at 5 and the same thing happens and we're at the peak, or maybe we're at the peak in December if the Fed decides to raise rates again in December, then over the course of the next year and a half, your money market yield is going to go from 5 down to 2.5% based upon what has happened in the 4 previous cycles. That's not very good, is it? I mean, that's not going to work. You're right back down to barely staying ahead of inflation. Meanwhile, if you take a look at the markets, 1 year after the Federal Reserve hit its peak, looking at the 4 prior cycles, average return, a little over 16%. So understand what cash is, understand the season that we are in, and yes, it's good to be making 5% on a money market account. By the way, that's no different than where it was back in the late 90s. But be careful, because that's not an answer to your investment allocation. That's not a solution to achieving long-term results, to achieving long-term returns, because if the trend follows itself, your money market rate of 5 is going to be like 2.5 in a year and a half. Meanwhile, the market, based on what has happened in the prior 4 cycles of when interest rates peak and then the Federal Reserve starts to back off, the average return on the market over 16%. That's kind of where we are, folks, if we think about where the Federal Reserve is and where we are at this inflection point. So keep that in mind. We're obviously here on the radio and in the office during the week to help you make sense out of all of these things that have anything to do with your dollars. So give us a call or check out our website at Nelson Financial Planning. We can be reached during the week at 407-629-6477. We hope you enjoyed the show, and join us again next week as we continue the conversation here on Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. Have a great rest of the day.